I think Karen's fate will come down to a single witness statement that no one expected. The Dedham courtroom was a crucible of tension on that sweltering July morning in 2025. The air conditioning hummed, but it did little to cool the nerves of those packed into the gallery. Jurors shifted in their seats, their faces a mix of exhaustion and resolve after weeks of testimony in Karen Reid's retrial. The prosecution had built their case like a house of cards, precarious but persuasive, leaning heavily on Karen's own words, her frantic, self-blaming statements in the moments after John O'Keefe's body was found in the snow. For some jurors, those words were a confession, a damning thread in a tangled web of evidence. But for others, doubt lingered like a shadow, and today, it was about to deepen. Vanessa Rizzitano sat in the gallery, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes fixed on the witness stand. She hadn't missed a day of the trial, driven by a need to honor her cousin John, the Boston police officer whose death in January 2022 had fractured their family. The prosecution's narrative was clear: Karen Reid, drunk and enraged, had backed her SUV into John, leaving him to die in a Canton blizzard. Vanessa wanted to believe it, wanted someone to answer for John's death. But the defense's alternate theory, that John was attacked at an after-party and dumped outside as part of a cover-up, had planted seeds of uncertainty. She felt the weight of every word spoken in this room, knowing it could tip the scales of justice. The witness stand held Dr. Emily Russell, a forensic pathologist with a calm demeanor that belied the storm her testimony was about to unleash. She'd been called by the defense, her expertise a lifeline for Karen Reid's team. The prosecution had spent days muddying the waters, discrediting defense witnesses with pointed questions and insinuations. Their strategy was simple: make Karen's statements, I hit him, the cornerstone of guilt, while casting doubt on any narrative that didn't fit. For jurors like Sarah Coleman, a schoolteacher with a knack for reading people, those statements were hard to shake. They felt raw, real, like the truth spilling out in a moment of panic. But Sarah wasn't so sure anymore, and Dr. Russell was about to give her a reason to question everything. The defense attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Laura Bennett, stood to begin her cross-examination. The room stilled, all eyes on Dr. Russell. Dr. Bennett began, her voice steady, you've reviewed the body camera footage from the night John O'Keefe was found. Can you comment on Karen Reid's behavior when she was found with his body? Dr. Russell adjusted her glasses, her expression measured. Ms. Red was in a state of acute distress, she said. She was crying, hyperventilating, and making statements like I hit him. This is consistent with what we call a trauma response, a reaction to overwhelming shock and grief. Bennett leaned forward. Can you explain what you mean by a trauma response? Vanessa leaned in too, her breath catching. She hadn't expected this. The prosecution had hammered on Karen's words as proof of guilt, replaying the body cam footage until it was seared into everyone's minds. Karen, kneeling in the snow, sobbing, her voice ragged as she repeated, I hit him. It had felt like a confession to Vanessa, too, a knife twisting in her heart. But now, Dr. Russell's words were shifting the ground beneath her. When someone experiences a traumatic event, like finding a loved one dead, their brain can struggle to process it, Dr. Russell explained. In that state, people may say things that reflect guilt or self-blame, even if they're not factually accurate. It's a psychological mechanism, not an admission of culpability. Ms. Reid's statements align with this pattern, disorganized, emotional, and not necessarily reflective of what actually happened. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sarah Coleman, in the jury box, scribbled a note, her brow furrowed. She'd been wrestling with Karen's words, feeling they pointed to guilt. But Dr. Russell's testimony was like a key turning in a lock, opening a new possibility. What if Karen's words were just a cry of anguish, not truth? The prosecution's lead, Michael Donovan, rose to redirect, his tone sharp. Dr. Russell, are you saying it's impossible for Ms. Reid's statements to be an admission of guilt? No, Dr. Russell replied evenly. I'm saying her statements alone, given the context of her emotional state, are not reliable evidence of guilt. They're consistent with trauma, which is common in such situations. Donovan pressed, his voice rising. So you're asking this jury to ignore a defendant's own words because she was upset? Dr. Russell didn't flinch. I'm asking the jury to consider the psychological context of those words. Trauma can distort perception and memory. It's not about ignoring her statements, it's about understanding them. Vanessa felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to cling to the prosecution's story, to believe Karen's words were proof of her guilt. But Dr. Russell's testimony was a crack in that certainty, letting doubt seep in. She glanced at her aunt, John's mother, whose eyes were fixed on the floor, her face a mask of pain. Vanessa knew they all wanted closure, but what if the truth was messier than they'd hoped? In the jury room later, the air was thick with debate. Sarah Coleman sat at the table, her notes spread out before her. I keep coming back to what Dr. Russell said, she told the others. Karen's statements felt so real, but if they're just a trauma response, how can we trust them? Mark, a contractor with a no-nonsense attitude, crossed his arms. She said she hit him. That's not nothing. The prosecution showed it's possible she hit him with her SUV. That's enough for me. But it's not proof, Sarah countered. They showed it's possible, not that it happened. And the defense's witnesses, the ones about the after party, there's too much we don't know. What if John was attacked inside that house? The room erupted in voices, some agreeing, others skeptical. The prosecution had done their job well, casting doubt on the defense's alternate theory. Witnesses who claimed John was attacked at 34 Fairview Road had been grilled relentlessly, their credibility chipped away. But Dr. Russell's testimony had given Sarah and a few others something tangible to hold on to, a reason to question Karen's words without dismissing her humanity. Outside, the trial had become a spectacle. Karen Reid's supporters gathered daily, their signs proclaiming "Free Karen Reid." Online, the case was a firestorm, with ex-posts dissecting every detail. Vanessa had seen the vitriol directed at her family, the accusations that they were part of some conspiracy. A video of a Reid supporter dancing outside their Canton home had gone viral, fueling her anger. "They think our grief is a joke," she'd told a reporter, her voice trembling. "John would be ashamed of how we're being treated." Back in the jury room, the deliberations stretched on. Sarah felt the weight of Dr. Russell's words, a lifeline for her doubt. She imagined Karen in that snowy yard, finding John's body, her world collapsing. Could those frantic words really be trusted? The prosecution's case hinged on them, but Dr. Russell had given her a reason to pause, to demand more. As the hours ticked by, the jurors remained deadlocked. Some, like Mark, saw guilt in Karen's statements, others, like Sarah, saw reasonable doubt. The defense's alternate theory, murky as it was, combined with Dr. Russell's insight, was enough to keep them from consensus. By the end of the day, the foreperson sent a note to the judge, they were hopelessly hung. The gavel fell, declaring a mistrial. Vanessa, in the gallery, felt her heart sink. Another trial, another delay in justice for John. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was hold her aunt's hand as they left the courtroom, the cheers of Reid's supporters ringing in their ears. Later that night, Sarah sat at home, replaying Dr. Russell's testimony in her mind. She didn't know if Karen was guilty or innocent, but she knew one thing, that single witness statement had changed everything. It had given her permission to doubt, to see Karen not as a monster, but as a woman caught in a moment of unimaginable pain. And in that doubt, Sarah found a flicker of hope, not for Karen, but for the truth, whatever it might be. For Vanessa, the mistrial was another wound, but she held on to John's memory, his strength. She didn't know what the next trial would bring, but she knew she'd be there, fighting for her cousin, no matter how long it took.